All night long and most of the day,
you can hear a lucky little laddie say,
oh, she's my lady love, my only queen, my baby dove. When I bring the ring around her rose, it's a secret all Laguna knows. And I know she loves me, I know she loves me.
How do you know?
Because she said so. She is my lily of Laguna, my only lily and my rose.
By the trolley stop, that's where I meet
Tamara de Lempicka. Tamara Lempicka, born 16th of May 1898, passed away 18th of March 1980, was a Polish painter who spent her working life in France and the United States. She is best known for her polished Art Deco portraits of aristocrats and the wealthy, and for her highly stylized painting of nudes. Born in Warsaw, Lempicka briefly moved to St. Petersburg, where she married Tadeusz Lempicki, a prominent Polish lawyer, then travelled to Paris. She studied painting with Maurice and André Lotte. Her style was a blend of late refined Cubism and the neoclassical style, particularly inspired by the work of Jean-Dominique Ingres. She was an active participant in the artistic and social life of Paris between the wars. In 1928, she became the mistress of Baron Raoul Kufner, a wealthy art collector from the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. After her divorce from Lempicki in 1931 and the death of his wife in 1933, Kufner married Lempicka in 1934, and thereafter she became known in the press as the Baroness with a brush. Following the outbreak of World War II in 1939, she and her husband moved to the United States, and she painted celebrity portraits as well as still lifes, and in the 1960s some abstract paintings. Her work was out of fashion after World War II, but made a comeback in the late 1960s with the rediscovery of Art Deco. She moved to Mexico in 1974, where she died in 1980. At her request, her ashes were scattered over the Popocatépetl volcano. Early life: Warsaw and St. Petersburg, 1898 to 1917. She was born on the 16th of May, 1898 in Warsaw, then part of Congress Poland of the Russian Empire. Her father was Boris Gorski, a Russian Jewish attorney for a French trading company, and her mother was Malwina Dekla, a Polish Jewish socialite who had lived most of her life abroad and who met her husband at one of the European spas. Tamara was raised in Warsaw by her mother and grandparents, Bernard and Clementina Dekla, who were members of the social and cultural elite. They were friends with Ignacy Jan Paderewski and Arthur Rubinstein. Their family grave is located in the Jewish cemetery of Okopawa Street in Warsaw. When Tamara was 10, her mother commissioned a pastel portrait of her by a prominent local artist. She detested posing and was dissatisfied with the finished work. She took the pastels, had her younger sister pose, and made her first portrait. In 1911, her parents sent her to a boarding school in Lausanne, Switzerland, but she was bored and she feigned illness to be permitted to leave the school. Instead, her grandmother took her on a tour of Italy, where she developed her interest in art. After her parents divorced in 1912, she chose to spend the summer with her wealthy Aunt Stefa in St. Petersburg. There, in 1915, she met and fell in love with the prominent Polish lawyer Tadeusz Lempicki, 1888 to 1951. Her family offered him a large dowry, and they were married in 1916 in the chapel of the Knights of Malta in St. Petersburg. The Russian Revolution in November 1917 overturned their comfortable life. In December 1917, Tadeusz Lempicka was arrested in the middle of the night by the Cheka, the secret police. Tamara searched the prisons for him, and with the help of the Swedish council, to whom she offered her favours, she secured his release. They travelled to Copenhagen, then to London, and finally to Paris, where Tamara's family had also found refuge. Paris, 1918 to 1939. In Paris, the Lempickys lived for a while from the sale of family jewels. Tadeusz proved unwilling or unable to find suitable work. Their daughter, Maria Christina Kizet, was born around 1919, adding to their financial needs. Lempicka decided to become a painter at her sister's suggestion and studied both at the St. Petersburg Academy of Arts and Académie de la Grande Chambre with Maurice Denis, and then with André Lahotte, who was to have a greater influence on her style. Her first paintings were still lifes and portraits of her daughter Kizet and her neighbour. She sold her first paintings through the Galerie Colette Vail, which allowed her to exhibit at the Salon des Indépendants, the Salon des Automnes, and the Salon des Mois de 30 ans for promising young painters. She exhibited at the Salon d'Automne for the first time in 1922. During this period, she signed her paintings Lempinski, the masculine form of her name. Her breakthrough came in 1925 with the International Exhibition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts, which later gave its name to the style Art Deco. She exhibited her paintings in two of the major venues, the Salon des Tuileries and the Salon des Femmes Peintres. Her paintings were spotted by American journalists from Harper's Bazaar and other fashion magazines, and her name became known. In the same year, she had her first major exposition in Milan, Italy, organized for her by Count Emanuele Castelbarco. For this show, Lempicka painted 28 new works in 6 months. During her Italian tour, she took a new lover, the Marquis Sommi Piccanardi. She was also invited to meet the famous Italian poet and playwright Gabriele D'Annunzio. She visited him twice at his villa on Lake Garda, seeking to paint his portrait. He, in turn, was set on seduction. After her unsuccessful attempts to secure the commission, she went away angry, while D'Annunzio also remained unsatisfied. In 1927, Lempicka won her first major award, the first prize at the Exposition Internationale des Beaux-Arts in Bordeaux, France, for her portrait of Kizet on the balcony. In 1929, another portrait of Kizet at her first communion won a bronze medal at the International Exposition in Poznan, Poland. In 1928, she was divorced from Tadeusz Lempicka. That same year, she met Raoul Kufner, a baron of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire and an art collector. His title was not an ancient one. His family had been granted the title by the second to last Austro-Hungarian Emperor, Franz Joseph I, because Kufner's family had been the supplier of beef and beer to the imperial court. He owned properties of considerable size in Eastern Europe. He commissioned her to paint his mistress, the Spanish dancer Nana de Herrera. After its completion, Lempicka and the Baron began their relationship. She bought an apartment on Rue Macain in Paris and had it decorated by the modernist architect Robert Mallet Stevens and her own sister Adrienne de Montaud. The furniture was by René Herbst. The austere functional interiors appeared in decoration magazines. In 1929, Lempicka painted one of her best-known works, Auto-Portrait, Tamara in a green Bugatti, for the cover of the German fashion magazine Die Dame. This showed her at the wheel of a Bugatti racing car, wearing a leather helmet and gloves, and wrapped in a grey scarf, a portrait of cold beauty, independence, wealth, and inaccessibility. In fact, she didn't own a Bugatti automobile. Her own car was a small yellow Renault, which was stolen one night when she and her friends were celebrating at La Rotonda in Montparnasse. She travelled to the United States for the first time in 1929 to paint a portrait of the fiancé of the American oilman Rufus T. Bush, and to arrange a show of her work at the Carnegie Institute in Pittsburgh. The exposition was a success, but the money she earned was lost when the bank she used collapsed following the stock market crash of 1929. The portrait of Joan Jeffrey, fiancée of Rufus T. Bush, was completed but put into storage following the couple's divorce in 1932. It was sold by Christie's in 2004 following the death of Joan, now Van der Poel. Lempicka's career reached a peak during the 1930s. She painted portraits of King Alfonso XIII of Spain and Queen Elizabeth of Greece. Museums began to collect her works. In 1933, she travelled to Chicago, where her pictures were shown alongside those of Georgia O'Keeffe, Santiago Martinez Delgado, and Willem D. Kooning. Despite the Great Depression, she continued to receive commissions and showed her work at several Paris galleries. The wife of Baron Kufner died in 1933. De Lempicka married him on the 3rd of February 1934 in Zurich. She was alarmed by the rise of the Nazis and persuaded her husband to sell most of his properties in Hungary and to move his fortune and his belongings to Switzerland. The United States and Mexico, 1939 to 1980. In the winter of 1939, following the outbreak of World War II, Lempicka and her husband moved to the United States. They settled first in Los Angeles. The Paul Reynard Gallery organized a show of her work, and they moved to Beverly Hills, settling into the former residence of the film director King Vidor. Shows of her work were organized at the Julian Levy Gallery in New York, the Cavossier Galleries in San Francisco, and the Milwaukee Institute of Art, but her shows did not have the success she had hoped for. Her daughter Cosette was able to escape from occupied France via Lisbon and joined them in Los Angeles in 1941. Cosette married a Texas geologist, Harold Foxhall. In 1943, Baron Kufner and De Lempicka relocated to New York City. In the post-war years, she continued a frenetic social life, but she had fewer commissions for society portraits. Her Art Deco style looked anachronistic in the period of post-war modernism and abstract expressionism. She expanded her subject matter to include still lifes, and in 1960 she began to paint abstract works and to use a palette knife instead of her smooth earlier brushwork. She sometimes reworked earlier pieces in a new style. The crisp and direct Amethyst, 1946, became the pink and fuzzy Girl with Guitar, 1963. She had a show at the Raw Volmar Gallery in Paris in May and June 1961, but it did not revive her earlier success. Baron Kufner died of a heart attack in November 1961 on the ocean liner Liberté en route to New York. Following his death, Lempicka sold many of her possessions and made 3 around-the-world trips by ship. In 1963, Lempicka moved to Houston, Texas, to be with Cosette and her family and retired from her life as a professional artist. She continued to repaint her earlier works. She repainted her well-known Auto-Portrait, 1929, twice between 1974 and 1979. Auto-Portrait 2 was sold, though she hung Auto-Portrait 3 in her retirement apartments, where it would remain until her death. The last work she painted was the 4th copy of her painting of Saint Anthony. In 1974, she decided to move to Cuernavaca, Mexico. After the death of her husband in 1979, Cosette moved to Cuernavaca to take care of de Lempicka, whose health was declining. De Lempicka died in her sleep on the 18th of March 1980. Following her wishes, her ashes were scattered over the volcano Popocatépetl. Rediscovery. A resurgence of interest in Art Deco began in the late 1960s. A retrospective of her work was held at the Luxembourg Gallery in Paris in summer 1972 and received positive reviews. After her death, her early Art Deco paintings were being shown and purchased once again. A stage play, Tamara, was inspired by her meeting with Gabriel D'Annunzio and was first staged in Toronto. It then ran in Los Angeles for 11 years, 1984 to 1995, at the Hollywood American Legion Post 43, making it the longest-running play in Los Angeles, and some 240 actors were employed over the years. The play was also subsequently produced at the 7th Regiment Armory in New York City. In 2005, the actress and artist Cara Wilson performed Deco Diva, a one-woman stage play based on Lempicka's life. Her life and her relationship with one of her models is fictionalized in Ellis Avery's novel The Last Nude, which won the American Library Association Stonewall Book Awards Barbara Giddings Literature Award for 2013. Whew. Style and subjects. Lempicka's own description of her work. I was the first woman to make clear paintings, and that was the origin of my success. Among 100 canvases, mine were always recognizable. The galleries tended to show my pictures in the best rooms because they attracted people. My work was clear and finished. I looked around me and could only see the total destruction of painting. The banality in which art had sunk gave me a feeling of disgust. I was searching for a craft that no longer existed. I worked quickly with a delicate brush. I was in search of technique, craft, simplicity, and good taste. My goal, never copy. Create a new style with luminous and brilliant colors. Rediscover the elegance of my models. Lempicka was one of the best-known painters for the Art Deco style, a group which included Jean Dupart, Diego Rivera, Josep Maria Sert, Louis Lozowick, and Rockwell Kent. But unlike these artists, who often painted large murals with crowds of subjects, she focused almost exclusively on portraits. Her first teacher at the Académie Ranson in Paris was Maurice Denis, who taught her according to his celebrated maxim, remember that a painting, before it is a war horse, a nude woman, or some anecdote, is essentially a flat surface covered with colours assembled in a certain order. He was primarily a decorative artist who taught her the traditional craftsmanship of painting. Her other influential teacher was André Lohotti, who taught her to follow a softer, more refined form of cubism that did not shock the viewer or look out of place in a luxurious living room. Her cubism was far from that of Pablo Picasso or Georges Braque. For her, Picasso embodied the novelty of destruction. Lempicka combined this soft cubism with a neoclassical style, inspired largely by Ingres, particularly his famous Turkish bath, with its exaggerated nudes crowding the canvas. Her paintings La Bella Raffaella was especially influenced by Ingres. Lempicka's technique following Ingres was clean, precise and elegant, but at the same time charged with sensuality and a suggestion of vice. The cubist elements of her paintings were usually in the background, behind the Ingresco figures. The smooth skin textures and equally smooth, luminous fabrics of the clothes were the dominant elements of her paintings. Known especially for her portraits of wealthy aristocrats, she also painted highly stylized nudes. The nudes are usually female, whether depicted alone or in groups. Adam and Eve, 1931, features one of her few male nudes. After the mid-1930s, when her Art Deco portraits had gone out of fashion and a serious mystical crisis combined with a deep depression during an economic recession provoked a radical change in her work, she turned to painting less frivolous subject matter in the same style. She painted a number of Madonnas and turbaned women inspired by Renaissance paintings, as well as mournful subjects such as the Mother Superior, 1935, an image of a nun with a tear rolling down her cheek, and Escape, 1940, which depicts refugees. Of these, art historian Gilles Naret wrote, "The Baroness's more virtuous subjects are, it must be said, lacking in conviction when compared with the sophisticated and gallant works on which her former glory had been founded." Lempicka introduced elements of surrealism in paintings such as Surrealist Hand, 1947, and in some of her still lifes, such as The Key, 1946. Between 1953 and the early 1960s, Lempicka painted hard-edged abstractions that bear a stylistic similarity to the purism of the 1920s. Her last works, painted in warm tones with a palette knife, have usually been considered her least successful. Lempicka placed high value on working to produce her own fortune, famously saying, "There are no miracles, there is only what you make." She took this personal success and created a hedonistic lifestyle for herself, accompanied by intense love affairs within high society. Her daughter Cosette rarely saw Lempicka, but was immortalized in her paintings. Lempicka painted her repeatedly, creating a striking portrait series. Cosette in Pink, 1926. Cosette on the Balcony, 1927. Cosette Sleeping, 1934. Portraits of Baroness Cosette, 1954 to 1955, among others. Some of Lempicka's other paintings depict women who resemble Cosette. Lempicka was bisexual. Her affairs with both men and women were conducted in ways that were considered scandalous at the time. She often used formal and narrative elements in her portraits, and her nude studies included themes of desire and seduction. In the 1920s, she became closely associated with lesbian and bisexual women in writing and artistic circles, among them Violet Prefusis, Vita Sackville-West, and Colette. She also became involved with Susie Solidor, a nightclub singer at the Boîte de Nuit, whose portrait she later painted. American singer Madonna is an admirer and collector of Lempicka's work. Madonna has featured Lempicka's work in her music videos for Open Your Heart, 1987, Express Yourself, 1989, Vogue, 1990, and Drowned World, Substitute for Love, 1998. She also used paintings by Lempicka on the sets of her 1987 Who's That Girl and 1990 Blonde Ambition World Tours. Other notable Lempicka collectors include actor Jack Nicholson and singer-actress Barbara Streisand. And there it is, the life and times of Tamara de Lempicka.
If you're blue and you don't know
The
where
end.
to go to, why don't you go where passion sits?